Week 9 of the fantasy baseball season. And here's a few hitters I look to add this week. The first guy, Brandon Drury of the Cincinnati Reds. So Drury, he's come out of nowhere this season here, and he's definitely been solid for fantasy owners. And this Red team, that's obviously not a good team, and they're giving some veterans chances this season to see what they got. So Drury last season, he was decent with a cup of coffee with the New York Mets, but that was the last we saw of him. So on the season, 9 home runs, 27 RBIs, 32 runs scored, a stolen base on the season for Drury. 252 average and a 317 on base percentage. So right now he's available in 40% of fantasy leagues. Here's Drury, and he's showing good power. He obviously plays in a bandbox over there in Cincinnati, but he's hitting the ball as well with multiple hit games in the last 4 out of 5 games. So the last few games here for Drury: May 29th versus the Giants, 1 for 4. May 31st at Boston, 0 for 4. June 1st at Boston, 2 for 4. June 2nd versus Washington, 2 for 4, 2 runs. June 3rd versus Washington, 1 for 5 with 2 runs. June 4th versus Washington, 2 for 4, a homer, RBI, stolen base, 3 runs scored. And June 5th versus Washington, 2 for 4 with a run. So right here, he's playing good baseball, and he qualifies at second, third, and outfield. It's a good versatility, no doubt about it. And he's a guy playing every day and definitely being productive for the Reds and fantasy owners this season. The guy's Garrett Cooper, the Miami Marlins. So last season, he had minimal fantasy value as Cooper at times. But so far this season, he's been off to a slow start in the power category. But he's picked it up over the last couple weeks on the season. 4 home runs, 25 RBIs. 18 runs scored, a 300 batting average, and a 370 on base here for Cooper. But the last couple weeks, hitting 405 with 2 homers, 12 RBIs in that time. So right now, he's getting more of an opportunity, and he's playing good for this Miami Marlin team, is Cooper. The last few games for him: May 30th at the Rockies, 2 for 4. June 1st in a doubleheader at the Rockies, 3 for 8, 3 runs scored, 3 RBIs. June 3rd versus San Francisco, 3 for 5 with a rib. June 4th versus San Francisco, 2 for 4 with 2 RBIs. And June 5th versus the Giants, 2 for 4 with a homer and an RBI. So if you need a guy who has some pop, even though this season only 4 home runs on the season, but he's getting more of an everyday opportunity once again for this Marlin team. He's available in 90% of fantasy leagues, and he's got good versatility as well at first and outfield. And if he fizzles out, you just drop him back to the waiver wire. The next guy's Alejandro Kirk of the Toronto Blue Jays. So the big man here showing a lot of power for this Toronto Blue Jay team, even though he's not an everyday guy as well. On the season, 5 home runs, 16 RBIs, 307 average, and a 386 on base. So Kirk, he's red hot, white hot, whatever you want to call it, over the last couple weeks here with 4 home runs, 9 RBIs, and a 441 batting average. So Kirk, he's on some streak. He's been added in 25% of fantasy leagues over the last week, but still out there in 45% of leagues. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be hitting over 400 for the rest of the season here, but he's a guy that you ride the hot streak out and the power streak out as well until he fizzles out. May 29th at the Angels, 2 for 4, 4 runs scored, and RBI. May 31st versus the White Sox, 3 for 4, 2 home runs, 4 RBIs. June 1st versus the White Sox, 0 for 5. Second versus the White Sox, 2 for 3. June 4th versus Minnesota, 2 for 4, a homer, 2 RBIs, 2 runs scored. And June 5th versus Minnesota, 1 for 3, a homer, an RBI, and 2 runs scored. So right here, Kirk, he's playing great baseball. 4 home runs is Kirk in his last 5 ball games. So right here, pick him up. Catch is definitely a weak position in fantasy baseball, and he's definitely a guy I would go out there and get. The next guy's Frank Schwindel of the Chicago Cubs. So Schwindel last season and half a season with Chicago, he had a great year, and he got off to a slow start the first 7 weeks of the season here, but he's really picked things up at Schwindel. Right now available in 64% of fantasy leagues. So on the season, 8 home runs for Schwindel, 30 RBIs, 244 average, and a 293. So the thing I don't like about him is the on-base to batting average ratio, obviously. But the last couple weeks here, he's playing great. 5 home runs, 15 RBIs, 293 average, and a 373 on base. So Schwindel obviously getting an everyday opportunity for this Cub team. That's a middle-of-the-pack type of team. It's kind of a rebuild, and it's kind of not, playing veterans and young players at the same time. So the last few games here for Schwindel: May 30th in a doubleheader versus Milwaukee, 0 for 7 with a run. May 31st versus Milwaukee, 1 for 5 with a rib. June 1st versus Milwaukee in that one, 0 for 3. June 2nd versus St. Louis, 3 for 4, a homer, 2 RBIs, 2 runs scored. June 3rd versus St. Louis, 2 for 3 with a run and a rib. June 4th in a doubleheader versus the Cardinals, 3 for 9 with a homer, 2 RBIs, and a run scored. And June 5th versus St. Louis in that one, 1 for 4 with an RBI. So right here, he's driving in runs to Schwindel, especially in the last few games with over 6 RBI. So right here, he's a good guy. He's playing every day. And last season, he was really productive as well in that half a season with 14 homers, 43 RBIs in only 242 at-bats. So right now, he's finding his groove. And if you need some power and RBI production, I think Schwindel's a good ad this week. The next guy is Kyle Farmer of the Cincinnati Reds. So the Reds here, they got some hitters this season that actually have some fantasy value, and Farmer's definitely one of them. I know last season he qualified at 4 or 5 positions, especially catcher, which was a big boost to his fantasy value. But so far this season, only third and shortstop he qualifies on the season here for Farmer. 5 home runs, 30 RBIs, 20 runs scored, 262 batting average, and a 322 on base. So right here, he was a hot pickup last week. I recommended, added in 38% of fantasy leagues. But right here, still available in 54% of leagues here is Farmer. And shortstop, we know, is a weak position in fantasy, so I would give him a shot. May 28th versus San Francisco, 1 for 3, a homer, 3 RBIs. May 29th versus San Francisco, 2 for 4, 2 runs. May 31st at Boston, 0 for 3. June 1st at Boston, 1 for 3. June 2nd versus Washington, 2 for 4, a homer, 3 RBIs, a stolen base. June 4th versus Washington, 1 for 3, a run, 2 ribs. And June 5th versus Washington, 0 for 4. So right here, he's driving in runs. He's showing decent power as well here. Is Kyle Farmer. And he's definitely a guy who would go out there and get. If he's another guy that fizzles out as well, he drops him. But you need guys along the way in this fantasy baseball season where you could pick them up and they can help your fantasy roster at least for a few weeks. It doesn't mean they got to help them the whole season. But right here, if you could pick up a few of these guys and they can help you for a 3-4 week stretch and you can move up in the standings, that's the whole purpose of adding some of these guys, because it's tough to add a guy mid-season and the whole season he's going to be good for your fantasy team, because there's definitely peaks and valleys in fantasy baseball. Obviously, the next guy look to add is Jimenez of the Cleveland Guardians. So Jimenez, he's a definite prime example of that. Jimenez got off to the hot start early in the season, and then the last 3 or 4 weeks he's fizzled out, but now the last 2 weeks he's back on track here. 7 home runs, 29 RBIs, 4 stolen bases, 19 runs scored, a 308 average, and a 331 on base. So obviously his on base to batting average is horrible. But the thing that definitely gets me about him, man, is we thought he was a slap hitter, but he's already got 7 home runs this season. Well, last season he only had 5 homers in 188 at-bats. So he's taken a different approach. He was a former top prospect in the Mets system, but obviously the Guardians got him in the Francisco Lindor deal, and right now he's still available in 50% of fantasy leagues, and he qualifies at second and short. But over the last week here, he's hitting 444 and 18 at-bats, so he's white hot. Is Jimenez, and he's a young guy on a young team getting an everyday opportunity as well, obviously. So I would go out there and definitely get him. The last few games here for Jimenez. May 29th at Detroit, 1 for 4 with a run. May 30th versus Kansas City, 1 for 3, a homer, 3 RBIs. May 31st versus Kansas City, 2 for 3 with an RBI, a stolen base. June 1st versus Kansas City, 2 for 4 with a run and a rib. June 4th at Baltimore, 2 for 4 with a homer and RBI. And June 5th at Baltimore, 1 for 4, a homer, 3 RBI. So right now, he's got 3 home runs in the last 5 games as Jimenez. So with the batting average and showing some power in shortstop being a weak position, obviously, as well, he's one of the hottest pickups this week. The next guy's Ezekiel Duran of the Texas Rangers. So Duran, one of the top prospects in the Rangers system, and another guy who qualifies at second and short as well. So a lot of shortstops on this list. So far in the season here, in 2 ball games here for Duran, he's shown some promise already here in the early going. 2 for 7 with a homer, an RBI, and a run scored for Duran. So Duran, top prospect. He's getting an everyday opportunity for this Texas Ranger team. And so far in the first 2 ball games, he's batted 7th and 8th here. So right here, he's getting the chance. And he's available, very surprisingly to me, at 97% of fantasy leagues here. I thought more people would go out there on the waiver wire and get him, but not many people know about Duran. And he's top 4 prospect in this Texas Ranger team. So if you need some middle infield help, and a guy that can help you at second and shortstop. I think he's a good ad, and he's going to get the everyday opportunity. Like I mentioned, here's Duran. So go out there and get him in 12-team leagues or deeper. The next guy's Christopher Morel of the Chicago Cubs. So the Cubs here, they got some fantasy options this season here. And obviously a few guys on the list. So Morel, he's been a hot pickup in the last week, added in 44% of fantasy leagues. But right now he's still available in 42% of leagues. On the season, 2 home runs, 8 RBIs, 6 stolen bases, 15 runs scored, at 297 average, and a 391 on base. So very versatile as well is Morel, qualifying at second, third, and outfield. So right here, he was a big pickup this week, no doubt about it. But if he's still out there in your league, you go out there and get him, because he's bringing stolen bases dynamic and showing some power as well for fantasy owners. And with the good versatility, that's a guy that definitely has a lot of value when he leads off for this Cub team as well. May 30th versus Milwaukee, 2 for 8 in a doubleheader with a stolen bag. May 31st versus Milwaukee, 1 for 4 with a run. June 1st versus Milwaukee, 0 for 3, a run, a rib, a stolen base. June 2nd versus St. Louis, 1 for 4, 2 runs. June 3rd versus St. Louis, 1 for 5 with a run. June 4th in a doubleheader versus St. Louis, 5 for 9, 2 runs and 2 ribs. And June 5th versus St. Louis, 1 for 4 in that ball game. So Morel, he's going out there, getting the everyday opportunity, and he definitely can help fantasy owners in different aspects. Stolen bases, runs scored, and some RBIs and batting average so far. And obviously the qualifications at 3 different positions. And I would go out there and get him this week. And is Brandon Donovan of the St. Louis Cardinals. So Brandon Donovan, he's been pretty decent for this Cardinal team. And the Cardinals called down Paul DeJong a few weeks ago here for the speedy Donovan. And Donovan, another guy that qualifies at a few positions as well, second, short, and outfield. So on the season here for Donovan, this guy's a hustler, no doubt about it. 1 home run, 14 RBIs, 2 stolen bases, 15 runs scored, but a 315 average and a 440 on base in 90 at-bats so far this season. So he's going out there, and he's a guy just for your bench, or either a guy to fill in at different positions with injuries. He's definitely a guy that's worth going out there and getting it, is Donovan. So the last few games for him, he's been pretty good. May 31st versus San Diego, 0 for 2 with a run. June 1st versus San Diego, 2 for 4 with a run. June 2nd at the Cubs, 1 for 2. June 3rd at Chicago, 1 for 5 with an RBI. June 4th in a doubleheader at the Cubs, 4 for 8, a run, 4 RBIs, a stolen base. And June 5th at the Cubs, in that one, 2 for 4. So this Cardinal team, they're loaded offensively here. And Donovan's batting 9th, but he's a guy that's going to score a lot of runs. And the guy's going to get a lot of good hitting pitches to see here, obviously down in the lineup where this Cardinal team has many great hitters in their lineup. So right here, if you need a speed guy, run scored, and a guy who's versatile, I think Donovan's a good hit. And I don't think Paul DeJong's coming up anytime soon to obviously be a threat to Donovan's jobs. The final hit I looked at this week's Jesus Sanchez of the Miami Marlins. So Sanchez, he was a recommended pickup last week here, and he's still on this list, still available widely as Sanchez. In a lot of fantasy leagues, it's 74%. So on the season here, 7 home runs, 20 RBIs. The batting average, obviously not good, 235, with a 286 and 22 runs scored. So that batting average on base isn't good. But over the last week here, he's on fire, Sanchez, including a 496-foot homer he hit the other night, 364 in the last week. Homers and 7 RBIs. So Sanchez, he's getting hot here for this Marlin team. And he's a guy getting an everyday opportunity. So if you need a guy with some power, Sanchez is definitely worth an ad. May 29th at Atlanta, 1 for 4. May 30th at the Rockies, 1 for 3 with a homer and RBI, a run scored. June 1st at the Rockies, 4 for 8. 2 runs, a homer, 3 RBIs. June 3rd versus San Francisco, 1 for 4 with a homer and RBI. June 4th versus San Francisco, 1 for 3 with a run and 2 ribs. And June 5th versus San Francisco, 0 for 5. So right here, the batting average probably won't be that good this season here for Jesus Sanchez. But if you're looking for a cheap power alternative to your roster, if you got a lot of injuries or whatever the case may be here, I think he's a decent add to Sanchez. And he's coming up versus Washington, where I think he can have a good series, and he's available, like I mentioned, in 74% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few hitters I look to add here for week 9 of the fantasy baseball season.